Hey guys and girls, Bored now back with you, and on this video I will be talking about them, episode 3, and it is called Day Force. And this is the best episode so far. This series is going from strength to strength, which is really encouraging because I would say the first episode, although I liked it, was the weakest, and then there was a step up in the second episode, and this one's even better, so that's encouraging. That's the sort of growth and evolution you want over a course of a season, and it does a really great job of expanding on things in this episode, and it's a particular standout episode for the Betty character and for her just how manipulative she is and what a monster she is. And it's almost like I think you can think of her in terms of some of the radical extremist leaders that you sort of see in politics in real life. She definitely has that sort of cult, manic cult sort of feel to her. But I'll talk about where she goes in her plot in this episode in a moment. But first of all, I guess to set that up and why exactly Betty, what sort of stirs this even more so is the opening of the episode. So we open with that creepy song again, the one which was in the first episode, which the old woman was playing who visited stopped by the house when they were living back in Carolina. It was the opening scene of the first episode, and we can hear that song again. So clearly that's very much in Lucky's headspace. And the opening of this one is that basically one of the neighbour's kids is peeing against Liv's washing on the line, and she sees it and she just snaps again and basically chases him down. And this very tense sort of tracking scene. And it's one of those, it really gets inside her head. And having seen what we've seen so far in the series, plus the stuff which no doubt has happened to her in the past, which I'm sure they'll dig further into, I think you can completely understand her state of mind and how she could sort of snap, even though this is, it's the sort of thing that would make you mad, but obviously what's happened in the past and led up to this has escalated her reaction to the point that she chases the kid down with a stick. I guess also the fact that there is an extra twinge of him targeting the black neighbour sort of thing, so I think that's part of the sort of spite, if you like, behind what he does. So she chases him down, and again, it's really beautifully filmed. It's a really dramatic sort of sequence. Is she going to get to him? And she's got a stick, and he basically runs into the arms of his mother. And again, I think the way some of these scenes are shot out in the open in the neighbourhood, when obviously similar to the previous episode or the first episode when Lucky came out with a gun sort of swinging it about. In this case, it has this western sort of style where all eyes are on Lucky as she chases after the kid. And you really see her reaction, and the actress is doing a great job in the role. And just you have the sense of her having all these eyes on her. So it's a really dramatic, powerful opening, and sort of disturbing to see how far she's been pushed. But again, I think it gets into the psychology of it, and she has an interesting episode, which I will talk about in a moment. I'll just say actually she does. He decides to take a visit friends, relatives in a different area as a way to kind of take her mind off things. So she randomly takes this trip, and it just feels like freedom. Now, one sort of complaint I had in the first episode, I think, was about the music choices, and I think how they were just like over egging them. But since then, it has settled down, and I think there's some great music in this series and some great use of music to really make good dramatic points. And there's a great example in this episode, because when Lucky's on the bus and going into the city, it has this brilliant bit of music which is very familiar. It's been used in lots of TV and films. It was used in Us, by the way. Really broad, dramatic, operatic type bit of music. You'll know what I mean if you've seen the episode, but it just sums up perfectly this sense of freedom that Lucky Suddy has by going to this different part of town, this different area, where she knows like Negro people are more welcome. There's more freedom for African Americans then, and so it's just an escape for her into like a different world, into a more free sort of area. Because clearly what happened that morning, she's been going crazy in the neighbourhood, and she talks to, you know, like I think it's like a relative, like someone who's related to Henry, but also a series of friends, and it's just one of these where they're catching up, getting to know each other again, and just sort of talking about their various lives. And I think this episode and this sort of scene really feels very natural. It really grounds the characters, and you really get a sense of who they are. But basically, Lucky's friend or relative, like the main woman whose house it is, warns her about the dangers in Compton, basically, and talks about the legends there. And there's just this really eerie vibe around the table when they're having this conversation. So I like that as well. I like the fact that there's almost sort of a horror vibe to that, the legend of this town and what goes on there, and what happens, obviously, to African American peoples. And without actually saying much or expanding on it, they say a lot, and it sort of gets inside Lucky's head, and she's suddenly no longer relaxed. She becomes very frantic again and randomly decides to leave. And it's on the way over, when she's getting the bus back, she starts experiencing like images once again. Now I think this show has done a good job, like the writing and the tone of these scenes have done a good job of making you uncertain whether this stuff is in her head, or whether it's like if there is something supernatural or otherworldly. The bus like goes all black to her, and she sees like this creepy man in black type character. He's got like a top hat on, or some sort of like hat, and he just comes up behind her like really in an intimidating manner, and she absolutely freaks out. And the police are called, and the cop, he does talk to her in quite a patronising, demeaning way, but also he's reasonably fair with her. He just points to a pattern of behaviour now, like with the gun the other day, and couple of other things, and now this, and he just kind of gives her a warning. And he's been there a while, and in Henry's plot and certain important cultural moments in this period, and again through the lens of racism, I think it's a good way to sort of contrast this, because Henry and the kids go to buy their first TV, and this is in the 50s. It's around the time when people were getting their early televisions, and I think, I'm not too sure, someone can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I think in this sort of like white rich suburban neighbourhoods, I think they were the ones getting the early TVs, and probably for a lot of poorer people it was still, they weren't getting them, or if they did it was like few and far between. But in any case, it explores that, but I think it's also significant that it's done through the lens of these are African American characters in the family in the 50s. So I think what happens first of all is it frames it in that terms, and I think this is another power of the show, the fact that it just puts you in the African American experience and what exactly they must have been thinking back in the 50s when things were so, obviously a lot has changed now, a lot still needs to change, but certainly we've made progress. TV, the kids are really excited, and Henry's excited as well. I think it's hard for me to imagine someone my age because I just grew up on TV, but when it was an event like this to get your first TV and that, I could imagine that would be something quite special. But they're getting excited, but suddenly it cuts to a close-up of Henry and a blackface performer doing like a performance on the TV, and suddenly there's this subtle shift from like quite a light sort of joyful scene to oh my god, and Henry just can't believe it, and of course he snaps out of it quite quick and they buy the TV. One of the big grudges which people in the neighbourhood, particularly Betty, have against this family and against the ideas of African Americans moving into their neighbourhood is, I think they really begrudge them taking over their sort of properties and their things, like sort of their culture in a sense. So the fact that they get this TV and stuff, I think once that gets around the neighbourhood, it's almost another thing to sort of, that's gonna tick off the racist neighbours. Basically, they're gonna be mad that that they're now moving in on our spaces. They're enjoying TVs as well. How dare they sort of enjoy such a luxury? The husbands, like 3 of them, go to confront Henry about what happened with his wife that morning. He's on top of the roof doing something with the air, or I'm assuming it's for the TV. He's fixing it up for the TV over quite aggressively and threatening him. And it's sort of notable that Clark, who's Betty's husband, he's the one at the back, and he's the one kind of saying, well, let's not go steaming in here. We don't really want to escalate things. Let's just take a time out. And he's almost the one being more open-minded, saying, well, let's hear his side of the story first, or we don't know exactly what happened. And it's the other 2 are really pressing it and going in all gung-ho and being macho. And Henry, obviously this is news to him, but he stands up for his territory. He because he has a hammer in his hand at the time, and he does make a threat. He says, if I come down there, there's going to be trouble, basically. And it's nothing overly aggressive, but he stands his ground and just makes it clear that, we're going to go if you don't back off my property. And go over to Betty because she's talking to Clark at one point, and she's trying to sort of pressurize him into, well, be at the meeting tonight and let's really do something here. Let's really sort of press the issue. And again, I think it shows the power that Betty has in the relationship. And there's a scene with Betty and her friends where they're sort of gossiping and they're talking about what happened. And I think it's an interesting scene because what actually happens is the woman whose kid was the one that Lucky chased, she is actually not that pressing the issue. She's actually not exactly like sticking up for Lucky, but kind of saying, well, my son can be a bit of a. And I think she's about to add a but at the same time, she's not like totally all guns blazing and in favour of, yeah, let's do something about this. Let's go after her, sort of thing. And then it's Betty who kind of initiates that tone into like the conversation. She like twists people's words around and says, yeah, he can be a little devil, but you know, just a little sort of whatever would do. You would never like hit him with a stick, sort of thing. And she just initiates this like more aggressive tone into the conversation. And I think, yeah, Alison Pill does really step forward. She's a really good actress, but she's really good in this episode. Really good at the manipulation and almost the obsession of the character as well. The obsession of the character to be in control and to kind of, yeah, she does have like a sort of an energy, a disturbed sort of energy on her own, while being this sort of pristine, pretty, like suburban housewife. So it gets to this point in the meeting, and one of the other neighbours, like one of the men who we saw in the conversation with Henry, he's talking and he's leading the meeting because Clark doesn't show up, and he basically has no suggestions how to deal with it, and he has this like line about slow and steady, and Betty is not gonna like stand for slow and steady. She wants to accelerate it. She wants to do something now. And this is when Pill really steps forward in the episode, because she does this big sort of speech. And it's sort of funny because a lot of the people who were quite nervous and quite unsure about, should we really get involved in this? Should we really push this any further than we have? Suddenly, when she starts doing this grand sort of speech, that's when they all kind of get up and they're like cheering her, clapping her and stuff, and they're suddenly on board. And I think that's another thing where you can see the sort of realistic sort of ideas of like this sort of like extremist sort of leading, like an extremist politician, like leading these speeches sort of thing. And you can imagine sometimes when you see certain political figures and they're kind of just going out to divide people and to just fuel an already volatile situation, that if they don't say certain things or act a certain way, then there's a possibility that things won't escalate and that the people around them, there's more chance of them being a bit more cool-headed and sensible. But the moment you have this really sort of dramatic, captivating like speech from this strong character, and she's just using these points and basically twisting things, it's a bit like, again, the parallels are there between, you know, certainly someone like Trump and other figures, you know, someone like in the UK Nigel Farage, but where they might take something that's a kernel of truth and sort of twist it into something more extreme. So, for example, in this, Betty makes the point that forefathers, the white people who built this country and made it into what it is now, and the African Americans did nothing for the development of this country, which we all know is bullshit, but that's what she says, and she starts using like racial stereotypes like coon and what have you, and she starts saying when she's listing these stereotypes that, hey, this is what all they were doing all this years while we would our ancestors developed. So that's a good example where there's probably like a kernel of truth. I mean, obviously it's distorting certain things because it's overlooking the fact that it was the repression basically of those figures by white people that sort of pushed them into the margins. And obviously it's ridiculous because obviously, you know, African Americans did plenty of work to develop the country. But in any case, it's one of these things where it's like this small grain of truth which is just twisted around and used as something to like drive hate and division. And this is what leads to the end of the episode where and like a couple of other guys they light up the lawn, light up the Emery's lawn, and they light it up with the message, you know, Negro heaven basically. And that's the end of the episode. So pretty shocking end, and the image of Betty just out the window. But it's a really strong episode. As I said, let me know your thoughts if you've been watching them on Amazon Prime, and I'll be back soon with a review of episode 4. So thanks for listening, and goodbye.